Thanks, Don. Our guest speaker tonight is here to talk about something that affects all of us in this town, and that's immigration. So, without further ado, Don Walmsley to speak about settlement services.
Once again, it's always a pleasure to be speaking to such a plethora of intellectual people with the deepest depths of integrity. You guys. It's always nice to speak to the Rotary. Thank you very much for inviting me. One of the reasons I wanted to talk was to thank you again for partnering with us as we put on our very first citizenship celebration event, which is going to be held in the fall. And that's essentially, it's not a citizenship ceremony, it is celebrating those who have already become citizens and welcoming them formally or in some capacity to say, it's great that you've become citizens and part of our community. It's the brainchild of one of our board members, Pat Wozniak. Any of you have been around for any length of time know Pat. And she really had this sort of vision to do this, and rightfully so. So I'm glad you've embraced it as well. Thank you very much for coming on board with that. Having said that, immigration. Immigration clearly is a major story and continues to be along the Canadian landscape as well as, well, actually the world landscape. And there are all sorts of issues happening. What I can talk to you about is essentially how that impacts us here and potential impact as we see this trend continue to grow. There's no stopping. It's going to continue. North America, and if you look back, certain parts of Europe and other areas have been colonized by a wave of immigration. Canada was built on the fact that immigrants came to this country. Even the indigenous people came from somewhere else. The States is no different. So what we're seeing is yet again another wave that has happened throughout the past 200, 250 years in Canada, whether it's to come to grow farmland, whether it's to come to trap furs and get into the fur trade, or to come and grow crops, or just to get away from where you used to be. So what happens, we've had some major changes in the dynamics of how people integrate. At one point, you could just turn up. You show your passport where you go, and you come, there you are. And then, as we know, that when you get a large number of anything happening, bureaucracy kicks in. So processes, protocols, and those have changed, and those have changed recently. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but essentially we have our current streams are very specific in how you can get in. There's what's called the Express Entry Program. If you are a skilled tradesperson or have a profession. And how that works is you send a profile. You put together a profile, you send it in, and it's good for 1 year. And it's in a large pocket where people can, if they're interested in looking at you and your particular profession, they can pinpoint you. And then if it works out and they offer you a job, you come to Canada, within 6 months you can get your permanent resident status, which is what people who want to stay in Canada want to shoot for to begin with. The other is a variety of economic, what we call economic immigrants. These are individuals who are coming and they're working right away. For example, High Life is a classic example. High Life is an industry that has a certain number of jobs it needs to fill. It's, the expectation is that the industry will attempt to fill those locally or from within the country. Yeah. When that's not possible, they apply for what's called the Labor Management Impact Assessment. Basically, that allows them to hire one individual to come in from out of country, wherever that may be. It used to be that those LMIAs were free. They're not anymore. About a year or so ago, the federal government said it would cost an employer $1,200 per. Okay? So there's some upfront costs if somebody wants to do that. But you have to be able to prove over a course of time that you have tried to recruit locally or nationally and have been unable to do so. that's when that will open up. So you're seeing larger organizations such as mines and other kinds of industries where they have a large number of workers. That's what happens. For your information, High Life employs roughly around 1,200 people, 600 of which are newcomers. They're either temporary foreign workers, about 200 roughly, and 400 permanent residents. So economic development means they're coming into a job, they're coming right away and earning, and they are paying taxes. The third stream you tend to see are refugees. Now Canada is fairly unique in how it approaches bringing in refugees. There's what's called the GARs, the Government Assisted Refugees. These are refugees that will subsist for 1 year through government assistance. There are what we call the blended refugee stream, which is a combination of half private support and half government. Then there's what's known as the private sponsorship agreements. These are when you have a group of people, typically form a committee, and they raise funds, a minimum of about $30,000 to sponsor a refugee for 1 year. Canada is a model for the private sponsorship program. Other countries are saying, wow, this is, instead of it just being incumbent upon the government to provide support, it is, private people can do it. So you're seeing faith-based groups doing it. You're seeing local committees, communities that want to have some kind of growth or see a need or are concerned about the refugee issue in other parts of the world, so they can do that. One of the benefits of that, when you're with the government after the year, month 12, month 13, what happens? Because the government assistance is gone. Typically people, if they still need any support, apply to employment and income, EIA, employment income assistance, that's it. So there are those kinds of things. We have 60 million, roughly, they're estimating, displaced people in the world. We have 11 million already sanctioned UN refugees looking for places to go. So there's no scarcity of people who are requiring that kind of thing, and it is a process. For your information, people who apply for refugee status in Canada, only 47% are granted. Yes?
What would be happening with the ones crossing at Emerson?
Okay, now I wonder when that question would come up, because that's very topical. The ones coming across at Emerson, essentially, are asylum seekers to begin with. They are walking across, and Canada, because of its Geneva Convention agreement, signing that, is agreed and essentially obligated under those conditions to receive them. What happens is they come, they ask for asylum, they're given basically a number ticket to go to a meeting. They have to still prove that they can satisfy the criteria to become a refugee. A lot of these people are going to go back because they won't meet the criteria. You don't have documents. That's unfortunate, because if you don't have documents, you can't prove who you are. Can't prove who you are, we don't know if you're telling the truth. Whether or not your story is gut-wrenching or not.
Where would they send them back to then, because you're walking in from the U.S.?
Oh, that becomes an immigration thing, because a number of the people walking in are already in process in the States. Some of them have been there a while. What we're seeing, my opinion is, we are now seeing the backlash to 9/11. 9/11 triggered a whole psychological and emotional change in terms of how especially North America and especially the United States viewed the risk of terrorism. So you're starting to see a building, especially with the current new government, of xenophobia, fear of strangers. Let's circle our wagons, let's stay close, let's have America First products, let's do this. I mean, you can go back and forth philosophically, but essentially that's what's happening. There's a dynamic, there's a change in how certain elements are thinking. So there are people who are already in process, who've already got their claims in process in the United States, and probably have a good chance, are frightened of what's going to happen. So it's that fear factor that's coming over. We're also hearing now that they're finding more and more of a segment who have elements of criminality involved. The truth of the matter is, the federal government is going to have to make some decisions with regards to what to do with that flow. One of the decisions they made a couple of months ago was to stop announcing the numbers. No longer publicly are you hearing the numbers. Because you're getting 125, 135 in a month sometimes. So there needs to be something done with regards to that, and there will have to be negotiations, because we also know that border services with the United States are worried about criminal activity coming back. It's that easy to get across. Well, we already know that there are people involved in trafficking, bringing people, making arrangements, doing that kind of thing. So it's a very broad question. It's certainly something that's sort of impacted on us, but we need to recognize that when the people make the claim under the Geneva Convention, they have a right to be heard. So their story is heard, their story is evaluated, where it goes from there, that's what happens. And we're not seeing the impact because an office like Settlement Services, now Settlement Services is a federally funded, non-profit, non-government organizational program that provides settlement services and typically English language training to individuals who are permanent residents, okay, or refugees, which in essence is considered to be like a permanent resident status. And believe me, 98% of our people who are permanent residents, their goal is to become citizens. These people are on a path to move to become actual citizens of the country. There is a segment of working population that just want to be temporary. Come in seasonally, make their money, go back to their home country. They're happy with that. So we've got individuals here that are really looking to establish, they've made a conscious decision to leave their country and resettle here. The process, if you come in as a temporary foreign worker, remember I'm one of those LMIAs, you come in on a work permit. A work permit is timeline. Typically you get a work permit for a year with the potential to extend to another year. If a person who's a temporary foreign worker has a good, consistent work record of 6 months, and their employer is willing to write a letter saying, yeah, they're a good worker, we want to keep them working, then what happens is the worker can apply to the local provincial nomination program. Now, in essence, they go through a process where they submit criminal records checks, they have to do medical tests, sometimes more than once, the whole family, whoever they list. And if Brad, for example, came in as a temporary foreign worker and he was going through and applying to become a provincial nominee, he would list his partner and any of his dependent children, whether he's bringing them across or not. And we've learned, we find out all these little nuances, so that would be important. So that would be in his original application. Within probably about 10 months, if he's accepted, he will get a letter of approval. So it's basically the province saying, you know what, you sound like you're a great guy. You've passed everything else, all your paperwork is in order, pat on the back, we're giving you this letter of approval. That allows him, gives him a 6-month window to apply to become a permanent resident. Now, a permanent resident in Canada, the only thing they can't do is run for political office, vote in elections, and serve in the regular forces in the military. They can do everything else you or I can as a citizen. So, permanent status, they can be their whole life in Canada as a permanent resident. They don't have to become a citizen if they don't want to. Their card is strictly a travel card. We get this all the time. I don't want to lose my permanent residency. I need to renew my card. You can live your whole life in this country without a card so long as you don't leave the country. It's your get back into Canada free pass. So with your passport, no matter what nationality you are, and your PR card, they let you on the plane and allow you to come back into Canada. Easy peasy. You don't have the card, they won't let you on the plane. So, he applies then for permanent resident status. And it's actually almost a simpler process. Much of the same information, but not quite as much. And then now we're seeing within 18 months from start to finish. Used to be 3 years, cut down to sort of 2.5 years. So it's compressing a lot. You get a request from IRCC, Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, to say, please send in all your passports. So they get all their passports and fill out a couple little pieces of paper that come, and they'd send those in, and within less than 2 weeks, they get them all back with a very long form. Now the only thing left to do is, in order to get your permanent resident status, you have to leave the country. So we often see a steady stream on Saturday down to either Emerson. Now more are going to Boys Bay because it's closer. They just have to go out into the States, walk around the pole, come back in. The Border Services Guard looks at it, goes through it, signs it, the person signs it, bang, they're a permanent resident. That's it. So now they're in Canada for good. But remember, they've been working in Canada since the time they came in as a temporary foreign worker. So by that time, they're understanding their community. They put money away. They probably bought a vehicle. They're looking at buying a house. Interesting side note quickly, Winnipeg, I serve on a general housing committee. Winnipeg, it's all about rent, 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 rent. We need rental places. We need lots of rental places. Out here, it's all about houses, 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 houses. We need housing. Because they want to buy housing and they're in a position to buy housing. We're fairly unique in that we have such a large number of economic immigrants. Winnipeg has a larger number of refugees. And so it's a whole different dynamic. So here, when they become a permanent resident, we start from the point where the individuals get the email from IRCC to say, please send your passports, they come into us. We make sure everything's in order, all the documentation they need, they've answered the right questions, they send them off. When they get them back, we say, okay, your agreement, your offer is good too, because it is different with everybody, it's tied to their work permit date. You've got this much time to get everybody over. And if everything's fine, they can do one of two things. They can go back to their home country with their paper, and then when they return from their vacation with their family, so long as within that period of time, then they all become PRs at the same time. Or the individual like Brad can go out the next day down to Boys of Ing, come in a back, and he's a PR, but you'll wait probably 4 months until you get your PR card. Remember, that gets you back into Canada. So if you want to wait, or you can wait, people do that. Otherwise, sometimes we recommend just, if you're going to go back and pick up your family, don't bother getting your PR now, get it on your way back. Because it's all there. What the services we provide are basic English language training. Now, we have a program that goes all the way from literacy to level 6. Recently, you might have heard there was big chops in certain parts of the English language. Some programs in Winnipeg lost $300,000 worth of programming support. That was for what we call stage 2. That's for the ones who need a higher level of English because they want to go back to school. And probably 25% of the individuals who come here have post-secondary training. Lawyers, doctors, physicians, dentists, orthodontists, engineers, teachers. So they're coming internationally. Our chartered accountants, you wouldn't believe the chartered accountants get here. They come with international training. But if they want to re-qualify here, they have to go and they have to go through what's called a qualification recognition process, where they send their qualifications away. It's graded according to what Canada expects, and they're told what they need to do. That may be 1 course, maybe 2 courses, maybe simply spending 50 hours of doing practical work with an organization. So that's the process to get their certification. Canada is very interesting. It hardly has any reciprocity agreements. They used to have reciprocity agreements, for example, with physicians from Britain, from South Africa, from some of the Commonwealth, where you got your training there, you could come in here and everything was fine. Now, forget it. You're coming from another country. Whoa, we want to see. Remember, a lot of these people are coming from having worked for years in the field. Nurses who've worked in America, who've worked in Ireland, who've worked in the United Arab Emirates or in Saudi. You know, they're coming with experience. Suddenly, they're not valued. And there's a whole issue that we deal with around what's called culture shock. And that's for a whole other day, because culture shock is a very real thing for people coming over. And as I'm thinking about it, I should come back and talk to you about culture shock, what it is, what the 4 stages are and how to recognize it and what you can do. So if you're interested, please let me know. I'd be happy
Okay,
just to focus on that. Okay? So we do English language training. We've kept our stage 2. Lots of places have lost it. It's University of Manitoba lost their program. It went to Red River, or parts of it went to Red River. ACC lost their stage 2 programming. And because the focus is on people with the needs from literacy to what they call Canadian Language Benchmark Level 4. You need a CLB, Canadian Language Benchmark, Level 7 or 8 to go back to school. So from 4 up is not considered a priority for the funding people. But I think because we are unique, there's no place else to go unless you're traveling to Brandon. We have been able to keep ours intact, which has been very nice, because we have a number of people that continue to use it and are trying to go on and get their credentials recognized or go back to school in some form or another. The other thing we look at in terms of settlement services, in terms of how much time do I have?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. Looking at things like, we talk about buying houses. We talk about the fact that here you are in a new country, because remember, most of these people have an opportunity now to do things they've just dreamed about. If you're a guy and you're coming from a country where it's really difficult to get the things you normally would like to do, what's one of the first things you might look at wanting to purchase? A car. A nice car. You can buy a Hummer here. Whoa! You know, you can buy a Hummer, you can buy a Subaru Turbo Pack, you can do all sorts of things. All right, and it's great, and they're making a salary, and they go into the bank, and they work out the deal, and then they get their, you know, their families coming over, and they're looking for a house, and they go to the bank, and the bank says, you can't carry the debt load. So part of the challenge with settlement services is saying, yes, but you know what? There's some really great used car available. Look at what you really need. What is your priority? If you've got family coming over, where are they going to stay? So start thinking about those kinds of things, and that's not that easy to do. So those are some of the things we talk about settlement. We help them understand and try and help them, because to the best of our ability, weave through the maze that is Canada Revenue Agency, right? What benefits there are. We don't do taxes for them, but we'll respond to letters that come. You know, their request, can you provide this? What does this mean? This means this is what they're asking for. So we do things like that. We offer other kinds of programs to do with our culture, because the main name of the game is integration. If you want to sum it up in one word, it's all about helping people fit in, helping people integrate. Key is, and we tell them, each and every one, you're here to add on, to learn a new culture, not to get rid of your own. How many of us here have certain cultural, ethnic backgrounds? No? Exactly. And we're happy with that, and we remember some of it. Some of us are more involved than others. Don't get rid of it. We are where we come from. Our history is there. We're here now. So it's really a matter of embracing what's new, understanding, but you don't have to get rid of the old to do that. It's like when we talk about English language development. They say, well, I want to speak like you. And I say, no, you don't. The bottom line is they want our accent. We say, forget accent. What we want is clarity. So how do you achieve clarity? So we focus on that. It's being understood. It doesn't matter if you have an accent. I mean, if we went to your country, we have an accent. You can tell it. Any of you who speak another language as a native tongue, you can sort of go like that if the accent's off. But if you understand them, that's a critical piece. We do workshops, for example, talking about workplace integration. What a Canadian workplace is different, or how it's different from a workplace in another country. The do's and don'ts, because remember, we're having people come from countries where caste is still important. Who you know depends on what you do. The fact that you always give the boss a gift. You make sure your supervisor has a gift. So and this is just natural. This is the course. How that's different here. Although we may have some bosses who want a gift. You know what? They shouldn't be getting it. So it's a matter of trying to help them understand. I do a workshop on job interviews. what Canadian job interviews are like. The difference between their 6-page resume and a 1 or 2-page resume, where you'll get all the personal data because that is relevant there. Who you know, where you've gone to school, what those kinds of things are. So we're helping people find out what this country is made of, how we approach things. We look at employment. We're moving more and more into employment. In fact, I've made special requests to our funders. I want to hire a full-time employment officer to help with that whole pathway to employment, whether that's recruitment, whether that's doing all these kinds of other kinds of presentations or programs or that kind of thing. I'm waiting to see.